Welcome back to the Bourbon Lens with your hosts, Jake and Scott. In this week's episode, we feature Holladay Bourbon, and you may be into it right now because it is sweeping the waves of the internet. X, Instagram, Facebook. Holladay is hot, and you should be paying close attention to this. And so in this episode, we're just going to discuss the backstory of Holladay and what's happening in this distillery just outside of the airport in Kansas City, Missouri. So sit back and listen to our newest episode. Kyle Merklein of Holladay, the Master Distiller. I'm sure that title is kind of weighty sometimes. Thanks for hopping on with us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been insane. To first of all have that title. It's an odd one, especially as someone who kind of grew up in you see the Jimmy Russells of the world, and it's the Eddie Russells, and yeah, that's the Master Distiller, and I'm here just I'm making bourbon in Westin, Missouri, and then no one had tried it. So then you introduce yourself with that title, and they're like, "Yeah, sure you are." So it's been cool to kind of come along this journey, and then especially the last few years, you say Holladay is doing well right now, and it's surreal. So yeah, definitely thank you for having me. This is not something I ever thought I'd be doing, is podcasting about bourbon. So appreciate it for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know Scott is the one who introduced me to it. So Scott, I'll let you kick it off with what kind of questions we got tonight for Kyle here. Give him that heavy hitting journalism that you bring.
The heavy hitting questions.
Yeah.
No, it's been a long time coming because I know you guys reached out to us. I think it was right when y'all hit your first batch of the bottled and bond, and it was like a 6-year bottled and bond coming out of Missouri. Where the hell did this come from? It's like everybody's always like, oh yeah, they got a 3-year-old bourbon, they got a 2-year-old bourbon, and it's like, oh well, here's 6 years, just take that.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's pretty damn cool. That was back in the spring of 22. We were talking about that before we hopped on. So to have the original batch to compare some of the newer stuff too, the winter wheat, which is getting crazy press right now. It's like everybody's on the bandwagon. So something to be proud of, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. With our history, so briefly, if people aren't familiar about who we are, I'll kind of dive into that just to give you the background. It's going to be a long-winded answer to the how did we wait 6 years ultimately type of thing. So my dad talked a lot growing up, and I always thought it was obnoxious. He never could just give a simple answer. Now here I am doing the same thing, but we are the oldest operating distillery on its original location west of the Mississippi. It's a handful, or a mouthful, but we've been here since 1856. And Ben Holladay was the founder of our facility. That's why the bourbon is named Ben Holladay. He was the stagecoach king. Check out our website. There's a really fascinating story with him that you could have a 45-minute podcast talking about him alone. And so, there's a fascinating history behind that. But he and his brother David came from Kentucky, and obviously they knew what it took to make bourbon. And so they were living here. This property came open, and there was a limestone spring on site. And so they immediately thought, "Hey, let's make bourbon." Built the place up, created the original mash bill, and then on site we were distilling bourbon from that 1856 mark up until 1985 with that short prohibition break. And yeah, during that time, it was always the same way. It was always that original mash bill. We changed ownership a handful of times, but always made bourbon kind of with that original style that we always had. And so that was through our history. 1985, we had a different ownership group in charge, and they wanted to focus in on other things. People weren't drinking the bourbon, and so we built out a portfolio. We did, the common thing. You have the vodkas, we have tequilas, we have Five Farms Irish Cream. We built out everything in our portfolio, stayed operating here on site and bottled all of those products, but not actually distilling anything on site. That bourbon history, it was kind of just sitting dormant there. We had the cistern covered up. We had the rickhouses filled with bottling materials. And so it was kind of a wasted space for about 30 years. And then 2015, or really before that, came along, and our current president and the current ownership group really wanted to bring back that history and legacy, and so that's what we did. 2015, renovated the still house, kind of worked and resurrected those rick houses that we have on site, and started laying down barrels. And so 2016 is really when we started doing that full-fledged. And yeah, like most companies, we did always want to try to, we looked at releasing it sooner. We looked at that 3-year mark. We looked at the 4-year mark, and every year I would go and pull a good sample for the shareholder meeting, and present that and say, here's where it is. The best I can do is, it's not my money. The best I can do is suggest that we wait a little bit longer. I think that if we could make it a little bit longer, that would be ideal. And that's, to a credit to all of them. They were patient. They waited. We have, hadn't had someone on the board and the ownership group that was like, hey, I remember back in the day. I remember everything. The sweet spot was 6 to 10 years. Why would we rush this? And so they really ultimately drove that decision of, hey, let's wait. Let's do this the way that we used to always do it. So that was kind of how we got to that 6-year mark. And then from there, we knew we wanted to do things a bit differently from the past. So we respected it of how it was made and how we got to that point. That mash bill with that Ben Holladay, that 73% corn, 15% rye, 12% malted barley. But we wanted to tweak it a little bit. And so 2017, we started making the soft red wheat bourbon. That wasn't something we historically have done. Wheated bourbons have not been produced in our history. But, frankly, Mick Harris, our president, he's a fan of wheated bourbons. And I'm a fan of keeping my job, so I made them for him. And so that's where we started that line, started distilling and laying that down. As we were doing this, all the details, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but all the details that we put into this, going with bottled and bond out the gate, going with showing where the barrels are selected in the Rickhouse on the bottle, having a distiller's journal on our website, all of that was driven by the fact that we were very proud that we're proud of our history. We're proud that we have done this before, and proud that we could bring it back in the way that respected that. And so it was all these details that, we're producing it. We're doing it the way we've always done, but in a way that we, kind of modernize it. And so it's just telling our story and telling that through transparency and authenticity. I think that was the big driver behind kind of the package and how we brought that about. So yeah, again, long-winded answer to that kind of the statement about, not a 3-year, but we did sit up here in Westin, Missouri. You can kind of hide a little bit. So we sat under the radar for a few years, but then started kind of building it back up again.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, the interesting thing is the history, right? You're not just like some non-producing distillery that doesn't have any history. Like, if you go back to 1856, that's a long time to be distilling. That rivals some of the legacy distilleries here in Kentucky even. So that's pretty unique to be able to do that. And so, as you all kind of sit, was there always like, you said there was the age range that you all looked at. Was it always going to be thought through bottled and bond, or because like that's kind of become your all's thing, or was it like, hey, that's kind of like a benchmark for craft whiskey to show, hey, we actually mean something about what we're putting out?
Yeah, that it was definitely more of the latter. I mean, we historically, so I guess we have a lot of bottles in our boardroom that date back from the past, and we don't have a lot of bottled and bond in our history. That was not a major thing that we've found. We've found actually a bottled and bond corn whiskey from back, 70 plus years ago, but beyond that, we really haven't seen that a lot. And I think for us, it was truly that, yes, it's telling that we produced it every step of the way. It's that kind of, you see that in craft bourbon a lot, and that stamp that this is, meeting those minimum qualifications. It's an uphill battle, I think, for most places outside of Kentucky. to sell a bourbon. What is Missouri bourbon? You go through and it's an unknown. And so at least if you have that bottled and bond, that's that bare minimum kind of qualifications that at least you're meeting that. And so that kind of gives you the context to a lot of people in their mind. And really we had a lot of bartenders who over, the course of 6 years tell us that, like, hey, let us water or use it how we want to in a cocktail. Let's keep it high proof. And then it kind of bled over to all the whiskey groups. They said, hey, please don't keep it too low. And so, yeah, of our past, it was always like 80.6, 86.6, 90.6. I don't know why it was always 0.6, but it was. And so we looked at that and thought about that, but ultimately, 100 proof, our current line of thinking, that's probably the lowest proof that we're ever going to release. It's 100 proof or higher. Our one barrel, the barrel selections, those are all at the barrel strength. And then Rickhouse proof is the batch strength, the full proof. So yeah, 100 proof bottled and bond, that's definitely telling the story we made it, but that was never, not never, but definitely wasn't the original intention for sure.
I know you had Scott's heart though when you all released bottled and bond. That gets him excited for the whiskey at hand.
Yeah, I mean it definitely like signals something to me. Like you said, craft whiskey, it's like a benchmark. Like that's something to aspire to. So it always catches my attention when somebody puts out a bottled and bond, especially when they go out and say, "Oh yeah," and it's not just 4 years old; it's 6.
Yeah.
So I think it's
Yeah,
pretty cool. I also think it's pretty cool that you guys on your it's the one barrel, right? It's not single barrel.
Yeah, one barrel bourbon. Yep.
Yeah, and then you've got Rickhouse proof instead of cast strength or
Yep.
full proof or all the other. You guys just kind of put it out there to make people a little bit curious about what's on this, what's on the label.
Yeah, Missouri bourbon is already odd, so why not just embrace it? Let's go ahead and make all the names just sound crazy. But no, it was actually one time, fairly late in the evening. One time we were working through, and Patrick Fee, our VP of Sales and Marketing, he and his team had come up with some labels, and it had used those traditional terms, and we were showing those to Mick, our president, and he just didn't quite like it. It was just too normal, too conventional. And so our designer just kept biking up and down, have a hill on our property to the design studio, and just kept biking up and down the hill, bringing back a new version. And we were sitting there drinking bourbon because that was, a lot easier than biking up and down the hill. And so, yeah, it was one long night where that kind of came about, was those terminology. And it really stuck. Ben Holladay, he would have had stagecoaches that had one barrel of bourbon going west on the stagecoach line. And so that kind of makes sense. And then Rickhouse proof, it just, straight from the Rickhouse. So it's been a lot of fun to do details like that. We are not, it's rethinking a brand, and it's doing things our way. And so that's been pretty fun to do from the beginning.
Yes, and you talk about like paying homage to the past with kind of a new wave of thinking. Is the bourbon the original mash bill, or is it even a tweak on the original mash bill too? Because like obviously you said the wheat is something that your owner or CEO likes. So I was just curious about the traditional bourbon mash that you'll have.
Yeah, so the Ben Holladay, the one with the stagecoach on it, that is the original mash bill. So that 73-15-12 with the rye as a secondary grain. That is original. Obviously we couldn't produce it through time. Things have changed. Equipment's changed. It's not all identical to what Ben Holladay would have been using. But we do have the records dating post-prohibition of how did they make it, what was the cook details, all of those things. A well highly regulated industry, you have a lot of paperwork on site, so it helps when you renovate or revive a brand. You can go back to that. And so we did, but that was all kind of the stagecoach one is paying respect to that. the soft red wheat is still paying respect to that. So we keep the process and styles of making it the same. We're using wheat in the mash bill, so it's 73 15 12 still. Just using soft red winter wheat as that secondary, and adjusting the cook temps from there. But beyond that, it's still that char 3 barrel 118 barrel entry proof going into those rick houses. So still wanted to respect the past, even if we did change up the mash bill.
I love the history play there and just switching out the wheat. Have you all ever tinkered with rye whiskey, like as a soul expression, or is it kind of just staying in that bourbon lane for right now?
So for now, and let's call it the next 6 years, we have not played in that game. We get that question a lot, and I still would love to do that. There's a couple different things I'd like to play around with. The straight rye whiskey would be a lot of fun. I would be interested in doing that. I think it's something that we might play around with. I think ultimately our core has always been in that bourbon, and so that's still going to remain the same. But yeah, the two guys I mentioned earlier, they both hate rye whiskeys.
Mm.
And so, it's I had to make sure I would have a job long enough that I could revolt and make a couple things, and then we'll go from there. So
You should give them the story of how Outrider was made by Wyoming whiskey, and like
yep.
just have them listen to the Bourbon Lens episode where we get the team from Wyoming to admit that story, and then you're good.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll have to do that sometime. We spend some time here at the distillery drinking, so I'll turn that on sometime, and we can just happen to listen to it.
Stumble
So
upon it. So,
yep.
we kind of jumped in right to Holladay, but, Kyle, what's your background? Like, how did you get into this whole whiskey business?
Yeah, it's not something I guess I would have dreamed that I would be doing. I grew up on a farm in northwest Kansas, typical, small town farm. So we had cattle, but then also wheat, and for back there, milo or grain sorghum. And so, I grew up in that world, but during kind of my high school years and maybe a little bit before that, there was a drought in our area, and dad just kept telling me and my brother and sister, like, hey, don't do farming right now. It's just like, I know you'd like to come back and do the family farm thing, but right now it's just tough, and it sucks relying on the weather. And I couldn't quite completely leave kind of that ag world. And so I went to Kansas State University, K-State, and I got a bachelor's and then a master's degree in biological and agricultural engineering. And so that is kind of basically this subset of that I did was kind of focused in on grain processing, adding value to grains. My very first job out of college was making biodiesel from soybeans, and so it's the converting that grain into something else. And so that was wanted to stay in that ag world. My master's research was kind of in on that fermentation side, and so I thought maybe the alcohol industry would be a good side or a good place to go. But ultimately, still, you don't know. And first job after that was, or after the master's, then was working at a industrial ethanol facility, making neutral spirits, vodka for the industry in Atchison, Kansas. That's where my wife's from, and so I was doing that for a bit, and then this job came open, and was lucky enough timing wise that happened. Wouldn't have expected to make bourbon in this area. And yeah, I don't have the traditional bourbon side necessarily. I know the science side. I know a little bit on the flavor and the chemistry behind that. I kind of had a little bit of that training, but ultimately my background was more in the production and processing and the engineering style side, and then have kind of worked to learn the rest over the last 7+ years as I've been here. So a little bit non-conventional, and then throw in the fact that my parents didn't drink growing up, and so I didn't drink till I was 21, and my 21st birthday was Labor Day, so I couldn't even buy a drink. So it was, an odd thing. I wouldn't have expected that I'd be at this point, but it's, a really fun industry to be part of.
So the question is, do you remember your first bourbon?
I wish that I could say that I do and that it had like a lasting impact on me. Uh, but I really don't. It was probably in some, some college bar that's probably no longer a thing, and it was probably a overly cheap drink where it's mixed with a lot of sugary. I don't know. Realistically, that was probably it. My father-in-law ultimately is the one who kind of got me into bourbon a little bit more. So he was drinking bourbon back. I mean, he's been drinking bourbon, you know, for as long as I've known him. And he's got his staples, but he always would want to try a bunch of different things. And so it was back before bourbon was what it is today, and you could get a few more bottles. And so we'd always go over there anytime I'd go hang out with him. First meeting the father-in-law, you got to drink in order to be able to communicate properly. So we'd have some pours and try different things. And so that was really where I kind of learned to taste and appreciate bourbon over time. So that was kind of the background that got me into drinking it. But definitely, I need to come up with a cooler story of my first bourbon. I can at least make something up. I know our marketing team would probably tell me to make something up. So maybe I'll work on that for the next time I get asked that.
Just don't point them back to the Bourbon Lens when you said, I don't really know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you said something. You said non-conventional way into whiskey or to bourbon or distillation, but it seems like nowadays it's becoming more and more common that like industrial alcohol or the chemical engineering, all the science has injected itself into the whiskey making, which I think is very cool. So I think you're right on that wave of a new generation of distillers that are, not just learning as you go, but you have this background that's you can apply to the actual whiskey making, which I think is pretty cool. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly at least helpful to not have to learn every single detail as you go. That there's a lot you have to learn on the go, and I've still not learned it all. I know that. But yeah, definitely it's helpful to have a little bit of that background for sure.
Mm. What would you say was your biggest learning curve coming into this industry from, the ag side to like the production of, hey, like these drops of liquid matter as they come out of the barrel, and every every ounce going into a barrel is a cog, right? It is an expense that the company has to wait to see what happens with.
Yeah, it's an odd side. When you look at kind of industrial production, it's very very cheap to make. It's yeah, you spill a lot just to get your sample when you're doing that. And so it's a different world here. It's I think the biggest challenge, it's yeah, you want to worry about that, but you also have to balance the whole uh quality. You can't just maximize production. It's not getting the most PG per bushel. It's making it yeah, economical, but also taste of a certain spec. And then truly the the biggest learning curve, and I think this will be the case for my entire career, is you still have to somewhat take that white dog and project or have an idea what it's going to do down the road. And that was a challenge. I think that was the biggest thing, is we could make something, but ultimately white dog is it is what it is. It's not the most drinkable product in the world. And so you try it and you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure that's what it's supposed to taste like. I picked up a couple others from somewhere else, and that's, it's in line with that. But it's not something that is super common. So to go from that to then putting it in the barrel and kind of having trust that it would work out, it was a terrifying thing. For me personally, but then obviously for everyone who is invested in this process, it was just, we hope it's going to work out. We know we did what we did in the past, and we had some people who were around who could help guide with that. But ultimately, it's still that going from that distillate to final product was it was definitely difficult to comprehend for sure.
Yeah, it's the oh shit moment, right? Like when that
Yeah.
when that first barrel sample comes out, you're like, all right, let's see if this is truly it. I know I would be terrified, Scott. I know with your profession being risk averse, that's probably how you would feel as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's really just blind trust that the barrel's going to do what it needs to do, and in 6 years' time that it really didn't screw it up.
Yeah. And I was the one sampling it along the way, and so it's like, okay, yeah, this tastes good. It tastes like it's progressing, but we had to bring in some people because it's you want to make sure you have people in the industry also trying it. So we thankfully had, we brought in fairly early on and a couple other times Doug Frost, local to the Kansas City area. He's one of a few people in the world with the credentials of both Master Sommelier, Master of Wine, and he's judged spirits before. And so had him come in and we set up, 40 plus samples from distillate to, at the time, I think we had 18-month product, and had him try through those and set him up in our boardroom. And at the end of the day, we just walked in and it's like, okay, well, do we keep doing this? Like, how are we sitting? And so he kind of gave his stamp of approval at the time, like, keep doing it. You're going on the right track. So
Mm,
that helped. But yeah, you still have trust and faith that it's all going to work out okay.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, whew, I, and and these distillers are shelling out a ton of money because like you're going in a new refabricated distillation setup, right? So speaking
Yep.
of that, what are you all pot column hybrid? How do you all go through that process? What's a typical for someone who would come out to you all? What typically would they see from a distillation process? And that's kind of more your area of
Yep.
specialty after talking to you for a little bit here.
Yeah, yeah. So really, everything we're doing, it's kind of like a mini Kentucky, and it kind of feels like that too. So we're nestled down in the hills up here in Weston, and so it's from the beginning we have a two cooker system. We with that we start with our large grain corn, in our case, always going in that large cooker, and then the small grains going into the small cooker. We handle those separately, extract the as much flavor as we possibly can from those secondary grains. And so we start with that two cooker system. A lot have moved to a one cooker where you heat up your corn, cool it down, add your secondary grain, drop it down, add your barley. We stuck with that. Again, it was traditional for us. It was something that we felt was important and a distinction for us. And so we did that. It's not the easiest thing to do, but we wanted to make sure we respected each grain properly and brought out as much flavor and extracted really as much amino acids as we could from those secondary grains for fermentation. From there, we add our yeast, go in 3 to 5 day fermentation cycle depending on what we're doing. Open top fermenters, very quick, fast fermentation. And then we do go into a column still. It's an 18-inch column still from Vendome, 50 foot, 20 trays. And from there, the critical part for us, it goes from the column still into a doubler. For us, we maintain the proofs on that. That's the main thing we focus in on. Historically, again, I mentioned that, bring back the things from the past. Historically, our distillation proofs have been 120 off the column, 130 off of our doubler. And so that's what we strive for day in, day out as we're distilling. And so uh, continuing to do that. From there, after it's done with the doubler, drop it down in proof to 118. That is kind of the most recent barrel entry proof we've had historically. Going into char 3 barrels from Independent Stave Company, made in Lebanon, Missouri, and then going up into our rick houses. So we have the two rick houses on site. About 23,000 total barrel capacity between the two. It's, that's one rick house in Kentucky. And so we have those and have been filling those up. And so aging there, 7 stories. So yeah, just again, half the size of a rick house you'd see in Kentucky, and letting that sit in the climate, not rotating, not moving those barrels. Once they sit there, they stay there for the entire duration of their life, and then from there going into the bottle. So it's a quick rundown, but yeah, we again, all the things that you would see, the limestone spring water, the column still, the Rickhouse, is a very traditional bourbon is what we're doing here.
So was that just a strategy point early on, just to I don't maybe cliche to say, but put all your eggs in one basket and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go with it. Because, I think of a lot of like craft distilleries and they're like, well, we've got this one mash bill and it's like a little bit different than the other mash bill. And then we use these 12 different types of barrels, and some are level 4 char, some are level 3, some are, we do all these different things.
Yep.
And maybe I'm just thinking of like New Riff,
Yeah.
for instance. And but they keep putting out hits, right? It's like
Yep.
they keep putting out these limited release hitters, but then like you guys, it seems like you're like, we're going all in on this super traditional bourbon.
Yep.
We also have the wheated recipe, but even still, you're using the same ratio mash bill.
Yep.
So was that like a strategic point, and you just hit, and you're like, we got lucky, or
Sure, it was absolutely strategic. No, it was. I mean, it was a focus in on our past and what we thought we could do, and we would let the Rickhouses and the ages speak for it a little bit. We thought
Mhm.
that that would be a big driver for it. I think I mean, don't get me wrong. We do have trial barrels up in our rick house, and we have different ones that we've tested and played with, and there will be various things come out, here in the Missouri market or at our distillery. But yeah, it was a focus in on what we have done well, and knowing that that rick house plays a big role in it. And so ultimately, when you start to look at floors in that rick house, when you start to look at ages, there's a lot of variables that come into play post production. And so we're really letting that speak for it, and it's more of the traditional, I guess, route. I think, like you said, you see a lot of experimentation, especially when brands start up. And from our end, we did, again, at least have that background knowledge, and we had that idea of what we could do. And so that was the thought. And then, from there, it was never set down where it's like, yeah, we have to do this, we have to do this, and we're going to throw in, these different things. It was more of a, we as we go, decisions can happen quickly around here. We talk and okay, let's try that or whatever. So but no, it was always a focus in on the traditional.
yeah, and I'm not saying there's one right or wrong way to do
Yeah.
it. There are people on both sides of the aisle that have been very successful at
I
either
mean, it's
approach.
it's
So,
taken me 7 years to even get the thought of a rye mash bill, rye whiskey going. So, it's change happens quick, but it's got to be on the right page. So, it's I appreciate both sides of that, and I think there's room for both, like you said, for sure.
yeah. And how big is your team?
Uh, that's a tricky question. So we, in our distillery itself, so kind of working on the bourbon day to day, we have, you know, six kind of core around that range, but on site we have bottling lines, and so that number increases up to about 120 on site, and then once you take into Salesforce and all
Yeah.
of that, upwards around 150 people at our company. So it's
Wow.
it's one of those things that it depends what you're looking at.
So people are probably wondering, we've talked a lot about the distillation and now we've talked even about the team members, but what does this taste like? I think that's the crux of it all, right? I know we have shared our thoughts previously in reviews, especially on the soft red wheat. This is my first time trying the bottled and bond traditional bourbon. But one thing that I will say just across board, and I don't know if you all aim for this, is a fruity note. Like it's a very fruity, like tropical fruit, like peach and pineapple, and it kind of like makes me think I'm sipping a smoothie a little bit as I get started. So that's one characteristic that I was not expecting, that I am thoroughly enjoying on both of these pours this evening that I've had.
Yeah, I think for us, we have noticed a lot of the kind of fruit notes, especially of all the people trying it, and it's not necessarily something that we've strived for necessarily. It is, one thing we uh, also hear, and I notice this as well, and that it's kind of what I'm looking for, I guess, a little bit when I'm looking for these barrel selections too. But it's the bourbon usually doesn't drink quite the proof that it is. It's not overpowering. It's not overwhelming. There is a sweetness to it. There is that fruit note that you get, and so that is something that we are focused in on for sure. Um, it definitely has become kind of that sense of or sense of place for us. That note of Missouri bourbon for us. So
Scott, what's your thoughts? I mean, I know you're a traditional corn bourbon guy. Um, I think it plays right into your sweetness, but interested to hear your thoughts on either of them.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking for a little bit more of the corn sweetness, but like you said, I got a lot of like fruity sweetness, and it's weird because one of my sons loves Pez, and he always like gives me one of them. That's all I get out of the pack. And there's some that are like raspberry Pez. And last night I tasted this in a blind with four other whiskeys, like craft whiskeys, about 100 proof. I think one of them was like 110 or so. And it like triggered that. It was like Pez, berry, candy, like nerds. Like it was just kind of strange. So like I put it in my tasting notes, like fruity Pez candies, a little strange. I guess it was like it surprised me, but then like that was big on the nose and initially, and then it kind of transitions into like this vanilla wave, and then it has like kind of like a little bit of a tannic like drying black tea like finish, I guess you could say. So it's kind of like it's multi-layered. I don't know if that's a good way to put it. It's definitely not one note. Like I was expecting, what I thought like super traditional bourbon, corn whiskey. Like
hmm
that's what I like, but this one has a little bit difference from nose to palate to finish.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the T note. I think the T note and like a little bit of like cracked black pepper kind of show up in both of them, and so it's really nice to see like some things that hit on both of them, but like on the bottled and bond bourbon, it was more like cream soda, like real creamy mouthfeel. Um, it made me feel like I was drinking a Big Red a little bit, which was really cool. Like White Castles and Big Red, that's a bad combination to talk about while you're drinking bourbon, but like I've had it many a times, and Big Red like sticks out. But then I go back to the soft red, wheat, and it's like, man, like this is something you want to put with your like apple pie a la mode or something, right? Like, or your peach a la mode, like it'd be perfect to have with. So I love them for different things, but I think they're super unique, and I know they're not like out to the masses, but the Rickhouse stuff. I got to try that in person with you at Justin's House of Bourbon in 2023. The Rickhouse strength is also pretty special whiskey as well. Um, will that see a broader release eventually?
Yeah, so the thought is, and it depends on which mash bill you're looking at. So the Ben Holiday one, the Stagecoach, the original, that one, it will be a little bit smaller release of that one, typically year in, year out. The soft red wheat, we're looking at that one being a little bit more widespread, a little bit more available. Again, it's kind of the continued process. I feel like it's a slow and steady process. We slowly get the bottled and bonds out into the world, and then you have the other Rickhouse, and so lags a little bit. But yeah, it for sure, the Rickhouse soft red wheat is going to be more readily available out in the market. It's never going to be a shelf item type of product, but it's not going to be impossible to find, hopefully.
And is that like the one barrel releases too? Or is that kind of a subset of the Rickhouse proof? Are they all barrel strength?
Yeah, they're the one barrels are all barrel strength. And that's one where with those again we offer that under both mash bills. And those have been traditionally, we again as a company have been around here, and so we have supported those kind of local Missouri partners of ours and have been expanding out and working from there. So not a ton of those in outside markets yet, for the one barrels, but kind of working towards expanding that. With that program, we never want to dilute it too much, because ultimately a barrel pick it's a tough thing. You got to get that barrel that tastes kind of how you would want it to taste, and not every barrel is going to be a candidate for that. And so we don't want to expand that program obviously too rapidly and lose the focus in on the quality of that. And so that one's always going to be slightly more limited in nature, but the for sure that Rickhouse is going out into the world.
It's getting loaded up in its stagecoach, and it'll meander around.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a little faster these days in long haul trucking, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Typically. Yeah.
I was gonna say, if the crew from Bourbon Lore keeps talking you guys up, it's gonna need to come sooner rather than later.
It's it's been crazy for sure to have people uh talking us up. It's just not one thing I would expect. I grew up in Northwest Kansas. I didn't talk to anyone for weeks on end, it felt like. So, this is odd, but yeah, we're slowly getting out into the world as production comes of age, and that soft red wheat is always going to be more readily available, and that's going to be the one that's out in the world more often as well. So.
Well, and that's a smart play, right? Because it seems like the consumer wants wheated bourbon.
Yep.
Maker's Mark is killing it. Obviously, the mystique around Weller.
Yep.
Wyoming whiskey has started to pick up a ton, right? So you have all these wheated mash bills that are like becoming more readily available, and consumers are craving them, especially well done ones.
Yep.
And I think that's super super unique. And just continuing in this vein, like obviously there's a plan, right? There's a 6-10 year plan. What would you think would be next for Ben Holladay, like as a group, right? What would be kind of the next opportunity or the next cool thing that people could expect on that 6 to 10 year roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. We're always playing with things here. We have played around with barrel finishing type, not anything but new barrels. It's all toasted barrel finishes that we've played around in our cave and releasing locally. But so there's always a chance that could happen out in the world. But I think to me the thing I'm most excited about, and again, this one I don't know the volume and where this all hits and spreads from there, but 10-year product I think is going to be phenomenal. I've tried 10-year-old product that we did in the past, and it always blew me away, and that's one I've been focused in on. So that's one that we'll be releasing here in, I guess just a couple more years, but that's the next step. And then it's just continuing to do what we're doing and bring the uh kind of each batch, each bottling, that unique story and the unique distiller's notes on the website, and really keep that craft with it and keep it rolling, because it's a big part of what we're doing. So
Sign me up for aged whiskey, like all about it. There's nothing like it. What the barrel does with good distillate, it's a lot of fun.
oh yeah, for sure. Yep.
Scott, what other things you got for Kyle? I feel like I'm grilling him over here, like he's in the hot seat.
That's what you should expect on the Bourbon Lens, right?
Yeah. It's been fairly calm. I've had a drink in my hand this whole time. It hasn't been that bad. So,
Yeah, we
nothing
don't
too off the
always come
wall.
with the hard hitting questions. I mean, we sometimes get into the nerdy stuff, which I think it's cool when we talk about fermentation, and because we're not experts in that, but it's kind of like there's a lot that goes into this damn bottle
Yeah.
that people just don't think about. It's not just a mash bill and age.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. It's there is every step in it, and even once once we got to the point where were ready for a first release. We were preparing. We knew it was going to be at the 6th year. We knew it was going to. Honestly, we had the labels, I think, designed and all of the plan in place. It's still, first of all, which barrels am I going to select for it, and how do you create that batch? And I went through a million different options of the ones that were of age, and then also things you don't even think about, like we got to actually dump these barrels, we have to commingle them, we have to filter them. What's the best way of filtering this? How am I going to make sure I don't leave char in the bottle, but also don't remove too much flavor? And so you have to think about every step of the process. And so there's for sure a good amount that goes into it that I know I really hadn't thought about until kind of entering this industry, for sure.
Yeah. And all for all the bourbon nerds, all of our listeners, nothing wrong with that. But if you really want to get nerdy about it and you like Rickhouse positions and all that, just turn the bottle on its side and they put the percentages of where the barrels came from on what floor, one through 7. I'm assuming that all of your Rickhouses are
Yep.
1 through 7, but
Yep.
like this batch, the first batch, is 21% first floor, 79% fifth floor. So it's like you get that nerdiness throughout the bottle. So if you come across a bottle, maybe just turn it over and check it out. I know people would love to do that with Four Roses single barrels. Do people still talk about that? I mean, I know that was big like a couple of years ago, but
I'm an 1814. I'm a floor 1 18%, floor 2 14%, floor 4 52, floor 6 16 in the soft wheat.
So that's the soft wheat. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, with that one we spread out throughout the Rickhouse a little bit more up front and had a little bit more to play with. But it's always, that's the unique thing about that distillation season and that bottled and bond piece, is that you have only a select number of barrels to work with, and you have to make what you want to out of those barrels. You can't take, obviously, different seasons together to create your product, and so it's inherently limiting and changes up each time. And so that was it's a lot of fun. We've had locally with bourbon clubs, they've come in or they've talked about it. They do a tasting of 3 different ones that we put out of different floors, and I'll have that sense of taste, that or the taste of place that we've talked about, but subtle differences. And so it's been pretty cool to see that as well. And yeah, talking on our website, Distiller Journals, I'm not great at grammar, so if someone else always has to fact check. My mom was a English teacher, and I never picked that up. But
Me and you both, man. Amen.
I just can't do it. But so if there's any weird grammar issues, that's I'm sorry.
Hey, I'm a distiller. I'm not a English
exactly.
professor.
I like math.
Yeah.
I like numbers. I like science. But so doing that and kind of documenting it, it's been a lot of fun, pretty cool to do, and something that I think we like the transparency. That's a big driver for us. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
If people don't know much about us, it's that transparency and the authenticity of what we're doing. It's bringing that to life in bourbon, and I think people appreciate that. I hope people appreciate that that we're doing that. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big theme of what we see over the past year or two, probably even longer than that. But people really just crave information.
Yep.
So, transparency when you're doing it, when you're distilling all yourself, it's the transparency is a little bit different than if people are sourcing, where sometimes people just want to know where the hell it was made. But
yeah,
when you're making it all yourself, the transparency looks like this nerdiness that people seek out. So
Yeah. I think we've overlooked my favorite thing about this bottle: screw top cap.
yeah,
and it's different too. It's not like a little cheap plastic
It's metal.
yeah.
caps.
It's awesome. Like,
Yeah, that was
give me more of those in the world of distillation, like in the world of
I
bourbon
would
production.
I would tend to agree. It's also a very polarizing subject. The number of tastings I've done where people are like, "Hey, why do we not have a cork? I want the sound of the cork. I want the," and it's like, well, I also remember before we had this, I remember opening those bottles and the cork crumbling, and I remember like then you got to dump it in a decanter. It's just not convenient and doesn't seal it long term. And so yeah, that was a big driver. We knew the issues with cork, but then again, just like everything else, that truly was also partly inspired by our past. We had some bottles that had that design and that shape, and I think back in the I see some old bottles from back in that era as well that had that. And I think Michael Veach was up here. He talked a lot about that the bourbons of that day that were the screw cap, sturdy screw cap like that, they have been preserved and they've aged well, but the ones with corks, they've had some slight issues. And so yeah, it worked out. Definitely appreciate that as well. So that was I'll have to give our Patrick, the VP of sales and marketing, he's got a big enough head already, but that was a good design move on his part. So
Yeah. Us salespeople, and that's kind of how we are.
Yeah.
I just naturally have a big head, so it's a double whammy for me. I want to do something good. But yeah, I think this is the first of many conversations, because now I'm interested in the Missouri bourbon history element and more of the Ben Holladay bourbon history element. So I know, Scott, we'll have to have Kyle on again sometime in the future to get that Missouri bourbon heritage that I didn't know we needed. We need it.
Yeah, I'm always game to hop on, talk bourbon and nerd out and drink it too.
Yeah,
so
love
that
it.
helps.
Scott, as we wind down for tonight, any further questions for Kyle?
I think we hit all the high points, and it's been a lot of fun. I'm glad we could finally do this. I think I say this with a lot of guests. It's been a long time coming.
No, definitely appreciate you having me on. And yeah, it's long time coming. It just took a couple different releases to convince you that I was not just completely making it up, and we're working from there. So it's all uphill from here. So
yeah,
we're all downhill. Sorry.
I'll shout out Jordan.
Yep.
He was great in making it all happen. So the PR teams and the folks on the back end, they don't always get the love that they need. So, appreciate Jordan getting all this set up. And Kyle, appreciate you hanging out with us. I know you got a million other things to do as you're coming back from some time off, but we appreciate you hanging out with us this evening, and cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Make sure you're connected with Scott and I via social media on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We'd love to connect. And if you're more the professional type, follow us over on LinkedIn. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Pour. For exclusive content and more, check out Patreon. Follow us there at Bourbon Lens. And last but not least, on your favorite podcast listening app, make sure you're subscribed, because every Monday, Scott and I release a podcast, and we would love to have you here listening to the newest features and the newest whiskey news. And until next time, cheers.